How did the murder of a police chief in New Orleans, Louisiana, lead to the creation of Columbus Day celebrations?
On March 14, 1891, 11 Italians were made the victims of a lynch mob on the streets right here in the city of New Orleans. This issue, in my opinion, is called for a formal apology.
Hey! Hello. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the White House. Ambassadors up here, right there, we're honored to have you with us this evening, and we're grateful for Italy's continued partnership on the world stage. Every family has its own mythology, stories we tell again and again, stories that help illuminate the forces that shape us and the values that continue to define us. When my father's grandparents, Gaetano and Concetta Giacoppa, came to America, they became Gaetano and Concetta Jacobs. And even though their names changed, like probably a lot of you, the values that they brought across the Atlantic stayed the same. Loyalty, generosity, kindness, faith. I brought those values with me to the White House. And it's my honor to serve as the first Italian-American First Lady. But our heritage is much more than our hospitality and food, isn't it? Yes. It's the Sicilians who were dragged from their cells and killed in New Orleans by an angry mob. It's Italians need not apply. It's people like my dad, who was never quite accepted by my mom's family because he was Italian. It's a history of those who led movements, who wrote our laws and penned our poetry, of men and women who were courageous, even when they were most afraid, of people who worked hard and fought to give the children the best future they could, who helped build the middle class right here in the United States.
I'm here today with author Sal Perricone, who's writing a book right now on a dramatic event in New Orleans history. Sal, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Charlie.
So Sal, in 1890, the police chief in New Orleans gets assassinated.
October 15th, 1890, at about 11 p.m., he's walking home to his house on Girard Street, and he was shot by about 5 men and subsequently died the next morning at Charity Hospital.
And the mayor responds by arresting over 200 Sicilians?
Yeah, he appointed a committee of 50 prominent citizens to conduct an extrajudicial investigation of the shooting. The police played a subordinate role in the investigation, and they arrested about 200 Sicilians. In December, they indicted 19 of them.
They go to trial, and they're basically acquitted or hung juries.
9 of the 19 went to trial, 6 were found not guilty, and 3 the jury could not reach a verdict on.
And the next day, a mob breaks into the jail?
Yeah, the trial judge, Joshua Baker, remanded him back to parish prison for proceedings to occur on the following Monday. And the next day, there was a mass meeting on Canal Street. The mob was led by attorneys, and they had their select assassins, handed rifles to them, and they marched on the parish prison.
And there's no police that stop them, there's no police that shoot them as they're trying to break into this prison?
Nope. Matter of fact, there was a police station built into the prison. The old 4th Precinct police station was part of the prison. The sheriff's deputies didn't stop them. They put up tepid resistance, but they broke in the prison and shot, beat, and hung 11 Italians.
So really, Mayor Shakespeare and other officials in New Orleans were pretty much complacent in letting this happen.
Complacent and complicit, and that's what the mayor recognized in their proclamation. They just let it happen.
This led to actually a war almost between Italy and the United States.
Yeah, Italy recalled its ambassador and told the President, Benjamin Harrison, that they were going to blockade the mouth of the Mississippi River.
Reparations were made?
The President, Harrison, instructed the U.S. Attorney here in New Orleans to conduct an investigation of the district attorney's case, and when it reported back that the district attorney didn't have a case, the United States government paid the families reparations.
Then New York actually got involved. They built a
Yes.
statue.
Yeah, they built the Columbus statue by Central Park.
And then 128 years later, they get involved again.
They get involved again and led to the effort to get this proclamation done by Mayor Cantrell.
And that was Mike Santo reaching out to you.
Mike Santo, the city of New Orleans, particularly the Italian community, owe Mike Santo and the sons and daughters of Italy a debt of gratitude.
After Michael reaches out and he says the Sons of Italy out of New York would like to get more resolution on this, Mayor Cantrell decides, yes, I'll step up to the plate and issue a proclamation.
After she was presented with the evidence, she said, okay, I'll do it. She is the 21st mayor of New Orleans since the lynchings. And she's the first mayor who stood up, took the initiative. The Italian community, both in New York and here in New Orleans, owe her a debt of gratitude. And I have here a copy of the resolution she executed that day. Mayor Cantrell showed a lot of courage.
She did.
Magnificent courage in doing this. She didn't have to do this.
And actually, there was a lot of pressure on her not to do it.
Yeah, there was, but she thought it was the right thing to do, as she said in her speech that day. This is the right thing to do. I will always remember those words.
What happened to those 11 Italians, it was wrong, and the city owes them and their descendants a formal apology. Some people didn't want me to make this apology today. But if you know me, I'm always going to have the courage to stand up what I know is the right thing to do in spite of. So I stand here with you today, and I issue this formal apology for ugliness that is 128 years old. We cannot change history, but we can acknowledge it and we can grow from it. So I want to say thank you to our Italian American community who has made New Orleans what she is today. It's a fact. It's a fact. For your contributions to the culture and economy, our landscape of our city, and of course our country. We cannot deny that.
As Santo's group arrives, there's a dinner, like almost a way for people to get to know each other. Because
Yes.
a lot of people didn't really know each other.
No.
And people came in from around the country.
They came in from California, they came in from New York, came in from Pennsylvania. We always thought this was a kind of parochial, insular event. It's not. It's not today, and it wasn't then. The people who came in from around the country manifest that.
There was another group that came in, a husband-wife from Houston.
Yes.
And I'm with Damon Palermo from Houston.
That's right.
So you guys drove in from Houston,
That's right.
and last night was a dinner.
Oh, we really enjoyed it. I think it really showed the broad attraction of what this solemn event meant to so many Sicilian Americans, Italian Americans across the U.S.
Tell me about today.
You know, it was amazing with the proclamation by the mayor. It was a huge step forward in terms of acknowledging this tremendous tragedy that really reverberated across the country. And I think it was a wonderful step forward in closing this chapter. We were on the precipice of having this historic tragedy slip into oblivion.
There was one woman who actually found out about it on Tuesday and arrived Thursday to come to the dinner and come to the event Friday. She was from Los Angeles. And I'm with Mariana Gatto from the Italian American Museum in Los Angeles. Mariana, welcome to the show.
Nice to meet you.
So fill me in. You came in from Los Angeles for the last 2 days. How has it been?
It's been a great experience, kind of a whirlwind, but this is such an important event, and it seems like being here was just in order.
How did you feel about today?
You know, today was a very special event, obviously. I think it's so relevant to our times. And as a historian, I'm quite pleased that we're talking about this finally. Many Italian Americans aren't aware of this event that has impacted a lot of their identity. It's very encouraging.
The people got to speak that had come in from New York and the consulate and even France. He had a magnificent panel there, so to speak.
Everyone spoke about the event and what the significance it was to them and their group.
Frank Maselli, the honorary consulate in New Orleans, I felt like he gave a great closing, and now we can actually close the chapter.
We can move on now. The chapter's closed. We can't forget it, and I just hope the people of New Orleans recognize the contribution that many Italians made to this city.
Not only New Orleans moving on, but the fact that Italian radio broadcasted, that it seems like Italy also is able to move on too, because we didn't realize that this is still, many people still aware of this.
People in Italy are aware of what happened here, and they still, particularly Sicily, they remember. They know about what happened here in New Orleans.
So it's a great feeling of what Mayor Cantrell did.
She did one great act of diplomacy that no mayor has ever done before her.
I'm with Judge Leon Cannizzaro, who was a former DA in New Orleans. Judge Cannizzaro, it's a pleasure being with you.
Thank you, Charlie.
So Leon, after the massacre, the Italian government steps in, the ambassadors recall, this starts to escalate. And the Italian government wants America to honor a treaty that says you have to prosecute murderers who kill Italian citizens.
That seems to be a very fair and a very reasonable request by the Italian government. There are people in this country who have come from Italy. There were some of these individuals were still citizens of Italy. And so for the Italian government to say, would you guys take some action against those individuals who are responsible for this murder, 11 innocent people, could you take some action against them? And the government basically responds by saying, there were so many of them, we can't indict or prosecute all of them, so we're going to take action against no one. We know that the Italians recalled their ambassador to the United States to return home, and we know that as a result of that, the President of the United States was in a very, very uncomfortable position.
The papers take it a step further and seem to imply that Italy is threatening war against the United States.
The newspapers were totally incorrect and inaccurate on that. There was never any declaration of war by Italy against the United States at that time.
President Harrison gives $25,000 to the Italian government to give to the families of the victims who were massacred. The relationships get strained. President Harrison has to figure out a solution to keep peace with the Italian community. What does he think to do?
Well, he comes up with a plan to honor the Italians by making a national holiday for Christopher Columbus. It's the 400th year anniversary of Christopher Columbus's discovering of America.
Leon, at the event that we had where Mayor Cantrell did the apology and recognition, there were Italians that came from around the country. And we had people from New York that came. One historian came in from Los Angeles, Mariana Gatto. She is the executive director of the Italian-American Museum of Los Angeles. Mariana inspired me to visit her and the museum and learn more regarding the challenge of Italians to be accepted into American society in the late 1800s. Before we explore what happened in America from 1892 to the present regarding Columbus Day, we should lay a foundation starting with America's bonding with Columbus and the goddess Columbia. In 1697, Chief Justice Samuel Sewall of the Massachusetts Bay Colony suggested that America's colonies be called Columbina, a feminization of Christopher Columbus. Thus, Lady Columbia was born. Lady Columbia became quite popular during the Revolutionary War, especially after African-American poet Phillis Wheatley wrote a powerful poem that implored General Washington to free the country from British oppression. In the Treme area of New Orleans and across America, there are schools and monuments dedicated to Phillis Wheatley. She was sold by a local chief to a visiting trader who took her to Boston in 1761. Upon arrival in Boston, she was bought by John and Susanna Wheatley. The Wheatley family afforded Phillis an unprecedented education. By age 12, she was reading Greek and Latin classics in their original languages. At the age of 14, her first poem was published to the University of Cambridge in New England. In 1773, Wheatley's book, Poems on Various Subjects, was published. In 1775, at age 22, she sent a poem to General Washington personifying the land, people, and spirit of the colonies into the goddess Columbia fighting for freedom. Washington sent her poem to editors who republished the poem in the Pennsylvania Monthly and the Virginia Gazette. He met with her in March 1776. Columbia became a symbol for moderation and justice. She stood up for the destitute, and especially immigrants who showed up on America's shores. Illustrator Thomas Nash employed the motherly, nurturing Columbia to embody the motherland, to remind audiences of America's values and democratic promise.
My great-grandfather arrived in New Orleans in 1897, and he worked in the sugarcane industry for a season, scraped together his earnings, and sent for the rest of the family who remained in my ancestral village of Lucasicola, Sicily. I think it's important to recognize that the 1891 lynching of Italians in New Orleans did not occur in a vacuum. It was but one expression of the growing animosity towards Italian immigrants, both nationally and locally in the southern United States. Nationally, the event coincided with a push to pass legislation that would limit Italian immigration to the United States and bar Italians from entering the nation population entirely. It also occurred in tandem with the growing eugenics movement and the publishing of political cartoons that depicted Italian immigrants escaping from the slums of Europe with words such as murderer and criminal written on their backs. It took place at the same time that immigration officials were racializing Southern Italians when the US government created the designation Southern Italian on immigration documents. Remember, about 75% of Italian immigrants hailed from Italy's impoverished south. And the designation Southern Italian differentiated this group from their more fairer Northern Italian counterparts. In the South, Italians were considered an in-between race, somewhere between black and white, and in some parts were segregated. Meanwhile, the Italian population is increasing. The political and economic power of Southern Italians, of Sicilians, is also growing in places like New Orleans. Therefore, Italians and Sicilians are seen as a threat. While many other Sicilians, including people from my family's village of Lucasicola, remained in New Orleans after the lynching, my family wasted no time in getting out. It's estimated that following the lynching, upwards of 25,000 Italians, mostly Sicilians, left New Orleans. Where did they go? They went elsewhere in the Mississippi Delta, where incidentally we would witness lynchings of Italians, Sicilians take place in the years that followed, including the 1899 lynching of 5 Italians in Tallulah, Louisiana. And just recently, the state of Mississippi, where the victims were buried, created a marker in memory of these largely forgotten victims of racial violence. In fact, between 1890 and 1910, Sicilians were less than 4% of the population, yet they constituted 40% of the so-called white victims of Southern lynch mobs. By the time my family settled in the southern Italian city of Pueblo, Colorado, which was then a steel manufacturing hub for the nation, there was a gentleman by the name of Hector Chiagliarone, who had emerged as a leader of Pueblo's Italian-American community. Chiagliarone was a journalist. He was the founder of one of Pueblo's Italian-language newspapers. He was also the president of the Colombian Federation of Italian-American Societies, which was an umbrella organization of Italian-American groups throughout the nation. In 1892, the year following the lynching, Chiagliarone and another Italian from Pueblo, a gentleman by the name of Colombo delle Quadri, traveled to the Colombian Federation's National Convention. The men addressed the crowd, the thousands of attendees present. Chiagliarone and delle Quadri implored the attendees to return to their respective cities and towns and raise money to create monuments dedicated to Columbus across the nation. And the men's advocacy worked. In the years that followed, we witnessed a proliferation of building of Columbus statues and monuments all over the nation. Chiagliarone and another Italian from Colorado by the name of Angelo Noce also led the push to have Colorado establish Columbus Day as a legal holiday. Chiagliarone and Noce urged the Italian-American community to stake their claim over this great explorer, this American hero, and link their heritage to the man who was widely considered the founder of the American nation. This I interpret as Calderone, Delle Quadri, and other leaders of the Italian American community's attempt to really uplift Italian Americans and identify Columbus as a person of Italian extraction to be proud of. I believe this was their attempt to communicate that Italian immigrants weren't the Dagos as they were portrayed by the media, but the descendants of great explorers. In 1907, Colorado becomes the first state in the nation to establish Columbus Day as a legal holiday. Calderone and Noce, along with the Knights of Columbus, would also be the catalysts behind the creation of Columbus Day as a federal holiday. Following the founding of the American nation, our leaders were looking for a hero that was free of association from the British, and they selected Columbus. In the years that followed, the feminine version of Columbus's name, Columbia, is personified as this goddess. Columbia becomes the symbol of the American nation that actually predates Uncle Sam. We also see just a plethora of places, features, institutions named in Columbus's honor, from the Columbia River to Columbus, Ohio, Columbia Records, Columbia University, which had previously been King's College, of course the nation's capital, Washington, the District of Columbia, companies like Columbia Sportswear, CBS, which is the Columbia Broadcast System, and then of course the moon rocket and the space shuttle.
Following the lynching in New Orleans, many Italians left the city to get away from the racism and bigotry. However, other tragedies lay ahead of the Italians as they tried to assimilate into America. The Italians looked for other industries to get into. One of them was mining. But the mines in America at the time had no safety standards. There was no OSHA. So many of the mines were poorly built, so mine collapse would happen frequently. Mother Cabrini once said that they were digging their own graves. In fact, in 1907, a mine would collapse in Monongahela, West Virginia, killing 169 Italians. Soon the Italians realized they needed to strike for better working conditions, safety, and pay. A few years later, in Ludlow, Colorado, a strike would be called.
Tragedies such as the Ludlow Massacre, which took place in 1914 in a little town in southern Colorado, where striking coal miners who were agitating for better wages and living conditions were attacked by guards hired by their employers and members of the Colorado National Guard. And 25 people were killed, the majority of which were women and children as young as 3 months old. In this former mining town, you'll find a monument dedicated to the victims of the Ludlow Massacre. The Ludlow Massacre was a watershed in American labor history that would, slowly lead to some of the reforms that would impact, workers' lives across the nation and lead to many of the rights that we take for granted today.
Chicago was going to have the Columbian Exposition. They erected a statue of Columbus that year. And today, one of those Columbus statues that was put up in 1892 is gone. It's in storage now. They recently had an event for the 130th anniversary of the lynching in Chicago, where they recognized Mayor Cantrell's speech and the proclamation she gave. And they even went as far as ringing a bell as they read off the names of the 11 people that were lynched.
Antonio Bagneto, James Caruso, Loreto Comites, Rocco Geraci, Joseph Macheca, Antonio Marchese, Pietro Monasterio, Emmanuel Polici, Frank Romero, Antonio Scafidi, Charles Traynor.
Welcome to Little Italy here in Chicago.
I'm Ron Onesti, president of the Congress of Italian American Organizations here in Chicago, the Joint Civic Committee of Italian Americans. And today we have a very special and solemn remembrance of March 14th, 1891, where 11 Sicilians were lynched by an angry mob. It's a story that hasn't been told enough, and we're happy to be a part of the continuance of the story being told. We're at the site where once a Christopher Columbus statue stood proudly. It was placed here in 1966 when Columbus Day became a federal holiday. But it was an original statue that was built in 1891, cast in Rome, specifically for the Columbian Exposition World's Fair that was held here in Chicago. Not by mistake, it happened the same year that the lynchings in New Orleans happened in 1891. On a fateful day this past summer, and in the interest of safety, these statues were taken down and put into storage. And since then, we've been working very, very hard to get the statues back, to keep the traditions and the generations of families who have celebrated here, to keep that tradition going and keep it alive. The people that we had out here today was a myriad of a cross-section of who makes up Chicago. You've got politicians from all walks of life, representatives of different organizations, community members. This really was a true cross-section of who's affected by racism, by bigotry, by unfair stereotypes. It affects us all. And today we tried to show by those who attended and those who participated just who is affected by those types of things.
There's several Little Italies in Chicago. They also celebrate Republic Day. That is Italian Independence Day. That is the day that Italy voted to become a republic after World War II. Since June 2nd, 1946. That area is missing their statue.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, before we lay this wreath to honor the father of Italy, I'd like to inform everyone that our Festa della Repubblica is also called Italian Unity Day. Our mission of celebrating the Festa della Repubblica is also to unite our community, just like Garibaldi united all of Italy. Only in unity can we be strong enough to maintain our language, culture, traditions, and history. It's very important that our history here in this historic neighborhood is not erased or forgotten. To achieve that, we need everyone's help, including our local officials, the Office of the Consul General of Italy, our ministers and representatives in the Italian Parliament, to help us keep our Italian history and culture alive in Little Italy.
The statue here in Little Italy, this area here was the Taylor Street area, which was the largest Italian neighborhood in Chicago, out of the 9 different Italian neighborhoods. And this statue here was originally displayed at the Chicago World's Fair. It was the 400th anniversary of the discovery of Columbus, and that's why it was called the Columbian Exposition. The time goes by, but there's a big difference from 1892 to today of how the people are viewing Columbus. I was actually here for the dedication in 1966. It's very personal, that statue. I was here the day that it was dedicated, and I was here the night that they took it down. It's very important that our Italian Americans, the 2nd, 3rd, 4th generation, know all of our history.
All across America, there are Little Italies, where the core values of faith, family, and hard work, plus respecting the ancestors, are passed on. The Italian American Museum of Cleveland has a new exhibit dedicated to the lynching of 1891.
Museums are here to teach, and our main goal is to teach about Italian Americans in Northeast Ohio and all the contributions they made to the region. But we also want to tell the story of the wider Italian American community and the Italian experience in America. And unfortunately, some of those chapters are dark chapters, but they're important to remember because they teach us so many lessons. And if we forget those, we lose a sense of who we are, we lose connection to the past. The story of the lynching is something that we wanted to tell because it had been kind of lost and hidden in history. Italians went on and became leaders in this country and fought through all of the discrimination. But this was a particularly bad incident against Italians who were innocent. That is something that we need to remember as a community, need to understand why it happened and make sure that hate like that doesn't grow again in our country.
Yeah, my dad was born in Italy. He was born in Ruvel del Monte, which is a small medieval village in the region of Basilicata near Potenza. And he came to the United States as a young boy. He was the first kid in the neighborhood to go to college, went to Fordham University. Well, when my dad passed away in 2016, I was looking at his yearbook, and they asked people, what's your goal in life? And other kids would say, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a doctor, I want to be an engineer. My father said, my goal in life is to be a real American. And it really hit me back in 2016 that my father was 18 when he graduated from high school in 1939. And Italian Americans were very discriminated against because Mussolini had teamed up with Hitler. And there was so much discrimination against Italians that they were either all fascist or all the mafia. And he had to fight on his own to become a lawyer and go on to join up with another Italian American guy. And he ended up running for city court judge and became the youngest judge in the history of New York State. Well, I started researching more of this, and I discovered that during World War II, 600,000 Italian Americans were classified as enemy aliens in the United States of America in 1942. And there were businesses were confiscated, newspapers were closed, people were relocated from the coastlines of California, away from utilities and army bases. Some people were actually put in internment camps. So we need the US government to apologize to the Italian Americans that were treated so poorly during World War II, while at the same time there were over 1 million Italian Americans fighting on behalf of the US, like my dad did during World War II. And we need to educate people about what Italian Americans have gone through in America's history. The second most lynched group of people from the 1800s till 1940. This discrimination with the Enemy Aliens Act. So, one, an apology, and two, education of our students. I'm working on legislation in the United States Congress now with the Italian American Caucus and a congresswoman named Zoe Lofgren from California to get this legislation passed, to get the apology, and two, to get money for educating people about Italian American history in the United States of America. And then, with that, let's take our special responsibility we have as Italian Americans who've overcome discrimination and accomplished so much to fight against discrimination of all people, because we know what it's about. We have that empathy because we've been through it.
What you guys do in New York, the Columbus Day Parade is fabulous.
Well, we're very proud of our Italian heritage, and we've been fortunate to have been blessed with the parade in New York. We organize it every year. Actually, we organize it year long. You know, it happens every day on Columbus Day.
So 35,000 people?
We have 35,000 people marching, and we have about 1 million spectators if we have good weather. We're broadcast on WABC and in many other regions around the country and in Italy as well. It's a big event that goes on for days and days and days, and they close all the streets down.
So the Italian influence in New York?
Big, big, it's big.
What started the parade?
Well, there were some ancient Columbus Day parades, but the ones that really are connected with our foundation started in the 1920s with Generoso Pope, who was the founder of the modern day Columbus Day parade.
Well, today it was Columbus Day. It was a sensational day, not only for Italian Americans, but for all New Yorkers. It's a day that we should all celebrate. Our culture and heritage, we believe in family, God, and country, and hard work. And we exhibit that every day. And I'm so proud to be an Italian American. I'm so proud to be here with my friends today. We look forward to coming back next year with another parade, perhaps bigger and better.
I do want to thank you all for being here, and it's a very important day. The Knights of Columbus, actually, and I am a knight as well. My grandfather was a Grand Knight in Monroe, and during that early era, before Columbus Day was established, it was the Knights that did so much for America. Actually, World War I was a keystone where the Knights that were too old to fight set up recreational shelters behind enemy lines for the soldiers as their way of contributing. When the war ended, the Knights funded the NAACP to help end the racism that was going on in America and shut down the second coming of the KKK. And then later, in the 1930s, Congress, for the work of the Knights, passed a resolution that the president would honor Columbus Day every year moving forward. This year and last year, he acknowledges in that proclamation that Columbus Day was established in America in 1892 because of a massacre that happened here in New Orleans. That killing of 11 Italians led to President Harrison declaring Columbus Day a major day. So when we march today in New Orleans, it is a combination of the Knights of Columbus and of the Italians who have done so much to establish New Orleans and the immigration as a welcoming place. And Adrian's idea was to bring it back, to send a message that New Orleans is important, and it's the rock. It's the place where it all got started. The president's going to recognize it, and also, as Congress does, that we keep this day where we recognize the significance to the Knights of Columbus and the Italian community. We have a great backdrop there for taking pictures. Inside, we have a wonderful cake that has the Knights of Columbus on one cake. We have a second cake from Gambino's for the Italians. We just spent $500,000 improving that reception area to tell the story of the Sicilian and Italian migration into America. So as you go through about 30 feet in, you'll see the display about not only the massacre that happened here in New Orleans, but Tallulah and Hahnville and other places as well. This wasn't a one-off. This was a thing that was happening for a full decade in Louisiana, where Italians were being lynched or massacred. And again, it was the Knights that did so much to establish America as a place that welcomed immigrants and especially Christians. Thank you again.
The Knights of Columbus Pilgrimage Center for the Canonization of Blessed Father McGivney in New Haven, Connecticut tells the history of the service of the Knights of Columbus to America. The Knights of Columbus were founded in 1882 as a mutual aid society to provide financial assistance in the event of a man's death to his widow and his orphans. By 1917, the Knights organization had grown to a size that was able to contribute to America's success in winning World War I. The older Knights built warming huts in Europe and later recreational facilities in America that were desegregated and open to all. When the war ended, the Knights continued their efforts to end racism in America by funding projects of the NAACP, such as the Gift of Black Folk by NAACP co-founder W.E.B. Du Bois. Their effort was needed, as in 1915, the second coming of the KKK had started. This KKK was racist, anti-Catholic, anti-immigrant, and would later support prohibition. The second coming of the KKK was inspired by the film The Birth of a Nation. By 1924, the Klan numbered over 2 million people. Across the nation, the Knights of Columbus responded to the activities of the Klan. In Indiana, at its peak in 1923, Klan membership was over 250,000. In Muncie, Indiana, a local KFC council organized a march of 750 people to protest against the Klan. In Oregon, in November of 1922, the Klan passed the Oregon Compulsory Education Act that required all Oregon school children to the 8th grade to be enrolled in public schools. The Knights of Columbus raised $10,000 of their own money to support a lawsuit filed on behalf of Hill's Military Academy of Portland. In March 1924, the law was declared unconstitutional by the Oregon Circuit Court. However, Oregon's newly elected pro-Klan governor then appealed the decision to the U.S. Supreme Court. In June of 1925, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled the Oregon law unconstitutional. In Ohio, the Italian community was established in Steubenville in 1906. In 1924, Klansmen murdered 2 members of the Sons of Italy during a gathering at the Italian Meeting Hall. Future the events of the Klan at Steubenville would be met aggressively by a new organization named the Knights of the Flaming Circle. By 1910, my great-grandparents had relocated to Northeast Louisiana. Soon, they would encounter the Klan. The most famous event in Northeast Louisiana is the Mer Rouge killings and whippings of bootleggers by the Klan. In Monroe, the Klan vandalized and committed arson to Italian businesses. My grandfather and his brothers joined the Knights of Columbus. Often they had to physically defend themselves. One positive result was that Grandpa's brother, Charles Briscotta, would enter the Navy and go undefeated as a boxer with 33 wins. He would return home and open a successful boxing ring named Roosevelt Stadium. Seeing photos of my grandfather marching on Columbus Day reflect his courage, which was part of the national effort in the 1920s by the Knights of Columbus that contributed to the collapse of the Klan. In 2021, the Knights produced a documentary with former Supreme Knight Carl Anderson detailing the challenge of the Klan to America during the 1920s.
In the 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan organized to stop Columbus Day celebrations and oppose Columbus statues. Cross burnings was one of its tactics. The Klan was anti-immigrant, anti-Hispanic, anti-Italian, and anti-Catholic. Its war on Columbus became a way to advance its white supremacist narrative against immigrants, people of color, and Catholics.
In 1934, with more than 50 years of contributing to America, the Knights of Columbus, along with the efforts of the Italian community, led to Congress passing a requirement that the President issue a Columbus Day proclamation. October 12th is the day that the Eastern continents were forever united and connected to the Western continents. President FDR would issue the first proclamation. In 2019, the Conference of Presidents of major Italian-American organizations, known as Copa Mayo, joined the efforts of the national Italian organizations to educate and inform the public regarding Columbus Day. Under the leadership of Judge Basil Russo, numerous activities have been implemented to educate on Columbus Day history.
Why Columbus is important to us? He was the vehicle that allowed us to survive all that bias and prejudice, because our ancestors kept thinking that if Columbus is accepted in this country as a hero, maybe someday they'll accept all of us as being loyal, good Americans, and we'll become part of the American fabric, become part of the American society. And it took us damn near 100 years to do that.
The film, Who Killed a Chief, was produced supporting the not guilty verdicts of the Sicilians in 1891. La Nostra Voce, the newspaper of ISDA, has featured detailed articles on the 1891 event in New Orleans. Judge Russo has spoken at ISDA conventions of the national media and political response in 1891 after the lynching. Copa Mayo had meetings with the White House and organized a grassroots campaign to inform of the history. As a result, President Joe Biden's 2022 and 2023 Columbus Day proclamations are more informative on the purpose for national recognition of Columbus Day, including Italian-American contributions to America and Italy's membership in NATO and the G7. In 2023, Copa Mayo and NIAF achieved a milestone event. The White House held a celebration of Italian heritage on Columbus Day and acknowledged the connection to the New Orleans Massacre.
Generosity, kindness, faith. And I brought those values with me to the White House. And it's my absolute honor to serve as the first Italian-American First Lady. Our ancestors' values live on in each of us. They breathe, they beat inside of us. In every artist and dreamer who pushes beyond the limits of our imaginations, in every advocate and lawyer fighting injustice, in every business owner who welcomes customers in with the warmth of home, in the children and the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren who put their shoulders back and find their courage even when they're most afraid. And we keep those values alive, even as Sicilians were dragged from their cells and killed in New Orleans by an angry mob. Even when signs went up that said Italians need not apply. Even in families like mine, where my dad was never quite accepted by my mom's family because he was Italian. My husband, President Biden, is working to build on what this community has accomplished and help us in all communities keep reaching for that bright futures that our ancestors were searching for. That's why he's growing our economy from the middle out and the bottom out, so families can carve out a good life. Because everyone deserves that chance. It's why we work so hard to pass on our ancestors' values to our children, isn't it? So that they too can draw on them during those hard days, so they can work hard and make their own way. Generation after generation, we've woven our art and our music and our stories and our culture so deeply into
what they hoped to give us when they signed their names at Ellis Island.
In 2019, Mayor LaToya Cantrell's courage and proclamation renewed interest in the 1891 massacre of 11 Italians. Today, the world should know that massacre led to the development of Italian Heritage Month around Columbus Day, a time where we honor the efforts of our ancestors, grow as a community, and celebrate who we are. To learn more on Italian American history, visit and subscribe to the YouTube channel Awe News.
Bellissimo!
Grazie per questa bella giornata.
Questa bella giornata.
È molto vento, wow! Ciao amici dalla
C'è la luna, mezzo mare,
di
mamma
Ciao, bello!
Figlio mio, vicinare, mamma mia, pensarci tu.
I'm in Sicily.
We're from Agira. It used to be called San Filippo di Agira. You know where it is? We come every year. We love it. It's great. It's just a great chance for us Italians to come out, enjoy ourselves, celebrate our heritage, and Christopher Columbus, of course. My father used to take me when I was young, and so me and my daughter come every year.
New York City Department of Corrections Columbia Association, proud to be here. Happy Columbus Day. President Tony Stoma, Department of Corrections Columbia, Joe Bongiorno, National Council Delegate. Thank you very much. It's a great day. Biggest parade after the pandemic. Yes.